All right, so Andrew Yang has been going around the country doing a little bit of a media circuit tour to promote his new political party called the Forward Party. And basically, he's doing this to try to, in his own words, break up the two-party duopoly of the Republican and Democratic parties and provide a third alternative for the American people. And listen, before we get into this interview, Andrew Yang is one of the most confusing political figures that exists in the country right now, at least in my opinion. I can't really pin down what this guy actually believes in or what certain policies that he believes in sometimes. Sometimes he'll be saying stuff that I'm 100% in agreement with. Other times he says stuff that makes absolutely no sense. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and watch this. Fortunately, this is a clip here where I pretty much agree with most of what he has to say, where he's basically talking about the current state of the duopoly and what we should be doing moving forward in the country.
It's rare because the duopoly suppresses all competition. If you're an independent, right now independents outnumber Republicans or Democrats by the numbers in this country. Let's say you're a libertarian. If you try and contest a particular race, you find yourself shut out. There are these primaries that control the process where it disenfranchises literally millions of Americans. 10% of Americans are right now deciding 83% of races, which means the other 90% of us are on the outside looking in.
You had the trouble, too, not being a well-financed candidate. So you took on you were like a brush fire. People were really intrigued by you. But the system has in its place the moneyed candidate tends, not all the time, but I'd say like 99% of the time, to have the edge in an Iowa and then a New Hampshire, and before you know it, it's a fait accompli. Now, it was a little different for Joe Biden, where he got his act together, I think, in South Carolina. But is it the structure of the primary system that does it, or is it just the way it's evolved?
The primary system does advantage certain candidates. And in the Democratic Party, you can tell that there is a bit of a thumb on the scale being applied from folks in D.C. very often. The Republican Party is actually a little bit more open, where whoever wins the most votes ends up in Washington. But you saw it with the way that the DNC sandbagged Bernie in both of the last cycles. They weren't like, oh, let the voters decide. It was more like, let's try and have the right candidate win.
But Bernie might be getting the advantage, right? I mean, the rap you hear against Joe Biden is he campaigned as a moderate, but progressives are calling the shots, and Bernie Sanders is leading the parade. Do you agree with that? Well,
again, in my view, the Democratic Party should probably be two separate parties at this point. And you can see the tensions within them. And you can say, well, trying to get them in the same tent might facilitate them working together. In my view, the real problem is that there are a number of moderate Republicans who would support aspects of, for example, the infrastructure package, but because of political pressures, there is such a fissure that if they cross over, then they wind up getting criticized by Trump, even though historically the Republican Party has been for rebuilding bridges and roads.
All right, so there was a lot of interesting stuff about what he just said there, okay? There were some things that I think are pretty obvious, like the DNC absolutely sandbagging Bernie, like he said, 2 times, not just 1 time, 2 times. The Democratic Party establishment stepped in to sabotage the most popular campaign, which was the Bernie Sanders campaign at the time. Now, listen, if you ask me, Andrew Yang, you played a little bit of a role in that by not endorsing Bernie Sanders. If you actually agreed with him on the majority of his policy agenda, then you would have probably backed him instead of waiting until the last minute and then jumping on board with Joe Biden. Okay, so that's just a little bit of side pit, but whatever, it's in the past. So everything else that he just said in there, I pretty much 100% agree with. Now, you'll notice that the Fox News host still was trying to push the narrative that even though Joe Biden ran as a moderate or a centrist, right, even though he is a far-right conservative relative to the American people, that somehow Bernie Sanders is secretly in charge or pulling the strings of the Biden administration. That is absolutely delusional, and Andrew was right to push back against that narrative. It's absolute nonsense. Okay, Bernie Sanders, AOC, the rest of these progressives in both the House and the Senate, they have almost no control over what corporate Democrats are doing. Corporate Democrats have gotten their way through and through the entirety of the Biden administration so far. We just saw a perfect example of this with the bipartisan infrastructure framework and the Build Back Better Act, which were both completely gutted and eviscerated from what Bernie Sanders wanted versus what Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema ended up succeeding in getting. So Bernie is clearly not running the Democratic Party. I wish that he was. Now, Andrew suggests that the Democratic Party splits up and splits in 2. Yes, please, 1000% please. Not only do we need more political parties in this country, we shouldn't have a duopoly, which is both parties are basically pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist parties where you don't really have any real choice in the election, and that's kind of what he was trying to get at, right? If you have multiple parties, more than two at least, if the Democratic Party split up, then you would have basically a corporate wing, a Democratic corporate party, and then you would have a Republican corporate party, and then you would also have a progressive party that presumably would not be taking the same corporate PAC money and can corrupt, allowing for the same corrupting influences to influence them, and would actually support the economic Bernie Sanders style left-wing populism. Now, if that was the political reality of our country, then it's my belief that the Progressive Party in that situation would sweep every single election, because they would be the only people actually talking about substantive issues instead of, the Democratic corporate party or whatever, focusing on like woke identity politics and corporatism, and then the Republican Party literally just announcing to everyone how terrible they are on every issue. So I would 100% support that reality. Now, again, he says a lot of stuff in there that I think is valuable. Now, what is his party that he is pushing in this entire interview? What is the actual goal of the Forward Party? Because here's where I start to get to a little bit of differences with Andrew Yang, right? He's right on the characterization of the Democratic Party and the reality of all that, but I was looking at the platform on his Forward Party, and this is something that has been bothering me for a while, is he is trying to play this game of triangulating between Democrats and Republicans and pretending as if like these are two equal, equally radical sides to them, right? That like, the Trumpist Republicans are just as radical and polarizing as like the Bernie Sanders style Democrats or the radical left or whatever you want to call it. This is insane to me, okay? This is where I start to question what Andrew Yang's actual motives are in doing a party like this. I mean, it's called the Forward Party for a reason, and the slogan of the Forward Party is not left, not right, forward. Okay, well, as a socialist, right, as an actual leftist, my understanding of the political reality, the economic reality of the current state of the United States right now is the only way that you move forward as a country, meaning progress as a country, is by implementing left-wing economic policy. Okay, that's how you move forward as a country. So it brings into a lot of question, in my mind at least, that you would use a slogan of not left, not right, forward. Well, name one single. I mean, if I had Andrew Yang in front of me right now, this is the question I would be asking. I would say, can you name one single policy that would move the country forward that is not a left-wing policy? I mean, seriously, try to come up with a single one. There isn't one. And so now we get into the actual policy agenda that the Forward Party is going to be pushing, because I think it's interesting. This is the first time that I've actually seen any like policy substance from the Forward Party, and this is a really incomplete list. So I don't know if they are, still coming up with some things that they want to throw on the platform. But before we get into some of the interesting parts of this, note that it is glaringly obvious that there are some major policies that are not in this. There's nothing about really healthcare reform, no Medicare for all, no prescription drug pricing reforms. There's nothing really about a minimum wage. There's nothing really about ending our foreign policy imperialism. There is nothing about cutting the military budget. There is nothing about, there are a lot of things that are missing from this platform, but I picked out a couple here that I thought were kind of interesting that I actually would support. So you got here at the top, American Scorecard, measure economic prosperity using a wider index that measures human as well as monetary indicators. That would be fantastic. Basically what he's saying is that when we talk about the economic prosperity of the United States, we shouldn't be talking about abstract things like GDP or how the stock market is doing. We should be focusing in on what is the material condition of average Americans. So I would 100% support that. Term limits, he says a maximum of 18 years in each chamber of commerce. I don't really know whether I support this or not, because you can have guys like Bernie Sanders, for example, who are in Congress, who are old as fuck, who have been there for a long ass time, and still they're fighting for good policies. So I don't know, it's kind of a wash there in terms of term limits, but he continues here, ranked choice voting, 100% support ranked choice voting. This is actually how you solve a lot of the problems with our electoral system and the primary system, especially within the Democratic primary, is you open it up to ranked choice voting so that people don't feel as if it is an all or nothing election, and they can actually like rank the candidates in terms of who they would like to win, and then the most amount of people are going to be satisfied with the end result. So 100% support ranked choice voting. Nonpartisan primaries, I thought this was kind of interesting too. What would the 2020 Democratic primary would have looked like if independents and Republicans were also allowed to participate in that? I don't know. Would that have dragged people further to the right, or candidates further to the right, to appeal to those voters, or would it have allowed somebody like Bernie Sanders to build an even wider coalition among anti-establishment supporters, basically? So that's something that's kind of interesting. I don't really know whether or not I would support that, but Independent redistricting commissions. This is very obvious. Okay, gerrymandering is like just the most ridiculous form of corruption that exists within our political system. We literally have politicians picking their voters instead of the other way around. So that's pretty obvious. Okay, data as a property right. Another interesting one. Okay, I 100% support this. I don't think that Facebook and Google and Amazon should have ownership over your data. Stop the DC revolving door. Yes, obviously we need to cut that out. We shouldn't have a situation where politicians go from influencing legislation to being promised $1 million salary at some big pharma company once they leave. We shouldn't be allowing the DC revolving door to continue. Yep, automatic tax filing, sure, make that shit simple. Democracy dollars. So basically, this is one of the things that I kind of agree with, but also kind of disagree with, at least in the lack of what he is talking about in something like this. So he proposes democracy dollars of $100 to each American to give to a candidate in every election, basically. Now, that sounds good at surface level, but the way that he kind of talks about this is as a contrast, or basically to offset some of the influence of the big money donors. Okay, that doesn't go nearly far enough. And this is another part of where I kind of question what Andrew Yang's motives are, because I saw him do an interview with Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, and Cenk was trying to get him to hammer home on how he was going to be financing this party, right? Are you going to accept PAC money? Are you going to accept billionaire, millionaire donations? How are you going to be financing this? And he wouldn't commit to not accepting corporate donations. Okay, so that is absolutely alarming to me. Now, if you want to say in and of itself, giving everybody, public funding of elections essentially is an inverse way of talking about this, basically. If you want to do public funding of elections, yes, but you have to also pair that with getting all of the corporate money out of politics. That is like the most baseline fundamental problem with our political system, is that all of this corporate cash, billionaire cash, is able to swamp our elections to where politicians feel like all they have to appeal to is those big money donors instead of average people. So that's a pretty glaring thing that is missing from this. Again, I don't see any changes to financing elections within this other than this. And so those are kind of the things that I think are missing from this. Now listen, in the broader picture, is he 100% correct that we should have more than two political parties, that we should break up the corporate duopoly? Yes, 100%. Nobody has any real choice. We don't have a functioning democracy in any sense of the word. Both of these parties, the Democratic and Republican parties, are completely bought and controlled by corporate America, okay? They're just two different styles of the same underlying fundamental substance, okay? That is the reality of our political situation today. They both support endless militarism and imperialism and handouts to corporations. They both actually support the same agenda in an underlying way. They disagree on social issues. That's the biggest gap that you could find between Democrats and Republicans. But on economics, on imperialism, they are pretty much in lockstep with each other. So yeah, we should have more choices for the American people. We should have more parties available for the American people to vote for. But is that going to be the Forward Party? Is this a viable thing that could be manifesting right here? I don't really know. Tell me what you guys think in the comments. I kind of want to get more perspectives on this. But as of how it stands right now, I agree with some of the policies that are being launched in this, but honestly, I mean, it's clearly incomplete to say the least, right? No Medicare for all, no legalizing prescription, or no legalizing drugs and expunging the records of nonviolent drug offenders, no healthcare reform, no major $15 minimum wage, none of the actual major policy agenda items that you would expect from a third party that was going to challenge the corporatism of both the Democratic and Republican parties. So got a lot of questions that have gone unanswered, but in the broader picture, yeah, he's 100% right. We should break up the Democratic Party and have more than our two-party system that we currently have.